Hello, and welcome to this reading of TRAINING.BSP, a story about a group of players who unravel a mystery hiding in an otherwise innocuous Half-Life map. Enjoy. Monday, October 19th, 2015. Welcome to the blog. The gaming community of the early 2000s was a very different beast to the one we have today. Without the ubiquity of wikis, YouTube playthroughs, and streaming, and with most communities receiving little to no moderation, all sorts of strange hoaxes and urban legends began to form. A lot of them were entirely fictional. Some of them had a grain of truth to them. Sometimes the truth was a lot more bizarre than anybody could account for. Despite the laudable effort that many of the modern gaming community have gone to uncover every last fact behind the modding scene, nobody has ever managed to get to the bottom of TRAINING.BSP. This blog is an attempt to set the record straight, or at least as straight as I can. The events I'm going to describe took place at least a decade ago, and I sadly didn't take nearly as many notes as I would have if I'd known 30-year-old me would be writing them up 10 years later. So please, do forgive me if I'm free with the facts, or not as clinical as I could be. I'm not a games journalist here. I'm just going to tell the story as best I can. Welcome to Zeke's Discount BSPs. As I said in the introductory post, the gaming community of the late 90s was a very different beast to the one we have today. Not just because things seemed so much more unfinished, but without the ubiquity of social media, sometimes all you would know about someone would be a username and a typing style. Sometimes, not even that. It's probably just that I was a teenager at the time, but things seemed so much more open and free. Anybody with an idea for a map could boot up Hammer, the Half-Life map editor, and cobble something together, which meant that there were hundreds upon hundreds of worlds to explore. Most of them were the same derivative stuff, of course, but that just meant the thrill you got when you found something genuinely unique or creative, like the genius House of Escher that hid its teleportation with environmental factors to make it seem like you were looping around in a space that couldn't possibly physically exist, was that much more earned. The experience was like being an explorer on some alien planet, uncovering vistas that possibly nobody else had ever seen before. Other maps were less successful but still interesting, like the unfinished Cartoon Land, which for its enemies tried to remodel Half-Life's Vortigaunts with brightly colored textures and cartoonish bonk sound effects when they fired lightning. Unfortunately, the author's ambition exceeded his technical skill, and the enemies ended up on entirely the wrong side of the uncanny valley. It didn't help that the author's enthusiasm for retexturing the environment seemed to cut out midway through, so that second half of the map involved fighting off weird pseudo-cartoonish monsters with an assault rifle in the eerie, organic-looking corridors of Zen, Half-Life's endgame. Or that, text being the easiest thing to add in, the map kept up what the author, who clearly didn't speak English as a first language, thought was a cheery, jokey commentary throughout the whole grotesque experience. In a way, though, the jankiness in the whole scene was kind of its appeal. You didn't feel like you were playing a polished, perfected product that had been carefully tested to appeal to you. It was there, warts and all, and the obvious amateurishness just hammered home the fact that you had absolutely no guarantee how the game was going to play out. One of the greatest innovations in this sense of the unknown came with Sven Co-op, a hilariously bug-ridden mod for Half-Life that allowed you to play cooperative maps with people across the internet. If downloading custom maps and playing them made me feel like a lone pioneer, Sven Co-op made me feel like part of an expedition, navigating our way through hostile and unfamiliar territory together. The genius of the thing was how Sven Co-op allowed its multiplayer servers to download a map's BSP file to your PC if you didn't already have it. Instead of having to make sure that everybody had agreed on a map to download and install, you could just get your clan together online, find a server, and place yourselves at the mercy of its random map rotation. Oh, and the goodwill of the map makers, of course. Sven Co-op was programmed by amateurs, for amateurs, and they made the common mistake of being way too generous with what they'd allowed their netcode to do. Valve had long since patched out the ability for a hacker to do things like open your computer's CD drive from across a server, but the Sven dev team were too dysfunctional to get security holes like that patched up. Anyway, I mentioned that I played with a clan, so I should probably come clean about that whole thing. We called ourselves Delta Force, and we started off playing deathmatch maps and giving each other ranks like in the army. As time went on, some of us, partially due to my enthusiasm for the co-op game, if I'm kind to myself, ended up drifting more and more into that side of things. That caused a bit of internal drama. Our then leader, who went by the tag Sergeant King, really didn't like them. He wasn't a bad guy, really. Just one of those kids who had an absolute hard-on for the military and wouldn't shut up about it, despite his combat experience having gone no further than watching Vietnam films. Anyway, King got real snippy when we ended up spending more time playing co-op than deathmatch, and ended up leaving the clan in the kind of drama storm that only teenagers on the internet can generate. It was probably for the best anyway. We were all getting pretty tired of the faux military shtick. A couple of us kept the ranks King had given us ironically. I had called myself Sergeant Player 1, a joke on the way that Half-Life's default deathmatch name was just Player followed by Player 1 and Player 2 if that was already taken, so I figured I would switch to Professor Player 1. After all, we had been demilitarized now. The new clan leader was a guy from Canada called Honk, in all lowercase. Honk was everything that King wasn't, laid back, good-natured, and kind of a burnout. He was the obvious choice, really. Honk had always been the one to patch things up in the past, when King's obnoxiousness and chauvinism had pissed people off. And we'd all decided that we weren't interested in winning anymore. We just wanted to have fun and bum around weird new maps. For a long time we played on the official servers that had the same rotation of tried and tested maps, mostly ones that came free with Sven Co-op. But it started to get to the stage where we'd run through everything there was to see, and we were starting to get disillusioned with the whole thing again. It felt like a lot of the more creative servers were dying off, especially since Half-Life 2 came out in 2004, and a lot of the Sven Co-op player base transitioned away to that. Then one evening, Honk mentioned on chat that he had found something new. Apparently someone had linked on one of the Planet Half-Life forums to a server they'd called Zeke's Discount BSPs. He'd saved a bookmark to the thread, but since then, it had been locked and deleted. A bit of digging turned up that a flame war had broken out over the server, allegedly stripping the credits from the maps it was using, and the mods had decided that it wasn't worth it. Honk hadn't been deterred though. Searching for Zeke's Discount BSPs got him a homepage that simply read, in unformatted HTML, quote, "Zeke's Discount BSPs is closed for business," unquote. But whoever operated the site hadn't cleared the rest of the directory, and we were eventually able to find some subpages that had an IP address for the server, which was, miraculously, still up. And what a goldmine it was. The MOTD when you logged in just read, lack of punctuation included, quote, "Welcome to Zeke's Discount BSPs. All the maps you want to play for low, low prices," unquote. As far as we could tell, nobody was still moderating it. At least, we never saw anybody with the admin tag log in all the time we were there. In fact, we never saw anybody there other than ourselves. For all we knew, Zeke had set this thing to run on boot on a server at work, then lost his job, and his replacement hadn't noticed. But whoever Zeke was, he was clearly a major hoarder of maps. It looked like he'd done a straight download of everything on Planet Half-Life at one point, finished or unfinished. And that was just for starters. There were all sorts of things in there, some of which barely qualified as playable. I remember one map called Don't Kill the Head Crab, where the players had to survive in a gradually shrinking room with a single enemy head crab without any one of them dying to it or anybody killing it. Another, the Irritation Machine, simply required you to walk the length of a single long corridor and mocked you at the end for going to the effort. Defend the Forum sticks in my mind as a surprisingly detailed and well-designed map in which the players have to protect NPCs presumably named after posters in some long-dead forum from trolls. An onslaught of standard Half-Life grunts, all given names in obnoxious leet-speak. It always struck me as a little depressing that somebody had poured so much time and effort into something that wouldn't have any meaning outside of a tiny group of their peers. Then again, I guess that was pretty par for the course of being a teenager on the internet. Anyway, with us spending the amount of time that we did on Zeke's discount BSPs, it was inevitable that sooner or later we would encounter Training.BSP. Training.BSP. Our first experience of Training.BSP was waiting an obnoxiously long time for the map to download. This wasn't rare in and of itself, as there wasn't any size limit on a BSP file, and a lot of makers thought that it was the height of comedy to add South Park voice clips to every conceivable player action. I remember wondering if Training would be a voice-acted tutorial for advanced techniques like grenade jumping or building human ladders, one popular trick for finding shortcuts, or just glitching your way out of a map, was to get another player to crouch, stand on their shoulders, and repeat the experience with more and more teammates. What we got, though, was the clans squeezed into a small, monotextured room with a single dark exit and the simple caption of Training on our screens. So far, so unimpressive. The exit took us out into a dimly lit subway tunnel, which we proceeded along. If you figured out the punchline to this one already, you're quicker than all of us. Either the designer clearly didn't have much of a sense of scale, or they'd never seen a proper subway because the ceiling of the tunnel was way higher than it ought to be, and the tunnel just continued straight without any change in texture. Just as I was starting to wonder whether we'd encountered an unwitting sequel to the Irritation Machine, I suddenly started seeing bullets fly and my health drop. The level had spawned a bunch of grunt enemies, almost on top of us. They weren't anything special, although the maker had apparently modded them for increased health and damage, a common cheap shot among co-op map makers to counter the increased firepower that enemies will be facing. But just as we had finished mopping them up, a message came through on Team Chat. Jersey99. Oh fuck! We looked up, and as one saw the bright light coming towards us down the tunnel. There was just enough time to realize we'd been had before a train plowed through the lot of us with a deafening woo-woo whistling sound effect, insta-killing everybody who was still alive and ending the map shortly after. As I said, we really should have seen that coming. The Whistle of Shame. After our humiliating defeat at the hands of a subway carriage, Training became kind of a byword for so bad it's funny map design. Anytime we got wiped out by a particularly low trick, and trust me, there were makers who delighted in exactly that kind of death trap, we would console ourselves, at least it's not Training. Even so, we stayed determined to beat it. The second time it showed up in the random rotation, we made a plan. For all that Honk had hated King's military discipline style of leadership, he was great at getting people moving in the same direction. So some of us stayed behind in the starting room. We had one of us check each side of the tunnel for alcoves we could dodge the train in, and the rest of us, including myself, went forward to deal with the ambush. The starting room spawned a killer turret as the train showed up, wiping out the rearguard. It turned out that there were alcoves to hide in, though, that we'd missed our first time round. It did mean that the team who went forward to trigger the ambush were at much lower strength, and ended up getting picked off. To cut a long story short, training required the players not only to take out unexpectedly spawning enemies much tougher than themselves, but to do it quickly and then flee back to the alcoves before the train hit again. It wasn't a map that played fair, but that, coupled with the fact that it had rubbed its gimmick in our face before we even started playing, just added to our determination to beat it. It wasn't long before we decided to stop leaving it to the random map rotation instituted by Zeke, whoever he was, and start hosting it on our own servers. Now that we were playing TRAINING.BSP on loop, dying and dying again as we perfected our technique and dodged that asshole train and the whistle of shame, which, we learned, it would only play if it was actually killing a player, it wasn't long before we mastered it. The ending was kind of a letdown. At the end of the tunnel, there's a stairway leading off the tracks to a platform with one of the familiar Black Mesa airlocks, and opening the airlock ends the level. There were still a few things that didn't make sense to me, though. Unless the map was very lazily coded, or unless that whistle sample was absolutely enormous, there wasn't anything on there that warranted the enormous download. But then, the whole thing was a mystery. I swapped virtual high fives with the rest of the clan, and we moved back to playing Zeke's random rotation of maps. The next time training showed up on Zeke's random rotation, we aced it. We didn't lose a single player to the whistle of shame or the teleporting soldiers. We had just reached the platform when Honk spoke on public chat. Wait, don't finish yet. He'd spotted something. There was a vent in the wall of the platform that had some level geometry on the other side of it. A player wouldn't be able to reach it normally, but by building a human ladder, we were able to get one of us up to check it out. We'd learned from the map's previous tricks, so we just sent one of us through. Divisible by 0. Guys, this is weird. There's a bedroom on the other side. Honk. Any doors? Divisible. 1, plus a window. Both locked. Gonna check the room out. Oh, gross. At that, we couldn't stop ourselves. Everybody who could make it climbed onto Honk's back and crawled through the vent. On the other side, the maker of Training had built a surprisingly detailed replica of a bedroom, far better built than the rest of the map had been. The window looked out on a grimy, moonlit parking lot, as if we were in a motel room somewhere, but the room itself was incongruously clean and well lit, and covered, as so depressingly often seemed to be the case among amateur map makers, with posters of anime girls in not-quite-porn poses. I was the last to get there, so I was crawling through a logjam of the rest of the clan as they all got into the room and voiced their horror at whatever it was Divisible had found. A few of them had even spontaneously logged out, but I still had to push my way through a crowd of allied characters in HEV suits to get there. In a chest, at the back of the closet, the builder had rendered from polygons in a painstaking 3D reproduction of the anime style, the dismembered corpse of a teenage girl. Divisible fucked up. I should say right now that the clan weren't the type to be easily shocked. One of the things I respected Honk the most for was drawing a line on the kind of edgy humor that a lot of online communities at that time indulged in. That said, we had fallen for links to Goatsy, and worse, at some point or another. Even so, there was something about the way the body was rendered that just made you want to look away. Perhaps it was the way that the primitive engine made it seem to be still grinning excitedly, or perhaps it was just the level of effort that the maker had clearly put into modeling this thing and the world around it. Honk thought we were fucking with him at first when we explained what it was, and I had to crawl back through the vent and take a turn kneeling so that he could climb through himself. He wasn't impressed either. and he was trying to suggest we should move on when someone else, I can't remember who it was, realized that the door was now unlocked. Outside Training's bedroom is a long hall, wood-paneled with purple carpeting. The whole map from this point onward seems to use entirely custom-built textures for its geometry, which would explain the large file size. I distinctly remember that I was one of the first ones through the door, and we had just started to check to see if any of the other doors were unlocked when a slamming behind us informed us that it had closed again. The thing about the era before voice chat became commonplace is that panic makes a bad situation that much more of a clusterfuck, as people sacrifice the ability to move in order to hurriedly type WTF. Personally, I ran back towards the room and got to watch the rest of my clan burst one by one into gibs before my character popped too. It was on. We went back to playing Training on loop on our clan's private server. It didn't take us long to work out what we'd done wrong. To keep the door to the rest of the map open, somebody had to keep their character facing the dismembered body. If they looked away, even for a moment, the door would slam shut again, and everybody inside the new secret area would burst into gibs, one at a time. Initially, Divisible by Zero volunteered for corpse-watching duty, and the rest of us headed through to map the branching maze of hotel corridors beyond. Map is the right word. The place was enormous, empty, and would take any opportunity to kill you without warning. Honk was still not happy about this. He kept saying that he didn't want to legitimize whatever point the maker was trying to make. The more we explored, the more I started to agree with him. Whoever built Training clearly had a teenaged sense of humor that a lot of us had started to move on from, making players flip switches to kill the helpless scientist NPCs before doors would open and they could progress. Thinking about it now, this was around about the time that the Saw films started making their way into the mainstream, so it could well have been he'd taken influence from them. By now though, we'd gotten ourselves invested. When we posted about TRAINING.BSP on the forums, we talked about the mapmaker's plans as if we knew him personally, as if this had been a challenge that he'd set us to complete. Some of us were even starting to speculate that we did, that it had been designed by King in an attempt to break our spirit. Whoever it was, it certainly became clear that he had a penchant for tricking players into murdering one another with rooms like the double cell, as we came to call it. Here, 2 players would have to enter 2 prison cells simultaneously to hold down levers and allow the rest of the group to progress. The kicker came when either of them tried to leave. The first player to let go of their lever would be able to escape, but the other would be crushed messily. The whole experience seemed to be designed to set us at each other's throats, and for a while, it almost succeeded, but Honk's patience, in the end, kept us together. That was one of the puzzles that we had to navigate. There were others, far too many to describe here. I remember having to navigate through a maze of invisible barriers, while the walls of the room flashed in vivid, ugly red and green zigzags. It wasn't until somebody posted in chat, "Oh shit, guys, look away from the screen for a moment," that we realized that staring at the strobing walls had messed with our vision somehow, and we couldn't see color correctly for a few minutes. The train from before made a few guest reappearances, now retextured so that its front piece was now smeared with blood and gore, with its trademark woo-woo whistle as it flattened us. The mapmaker's gusto for anime girls continued unabated through the rest of the map, with the art style becoming more amateurish and crudely scanned as the level went on. We started speculating that we were looking at the designer's hand-drawn art. The first problem came when we finally figured out a path through the wood-paneled corridors and into a darker area with walls of rusty, corrugated metal. Almost straight away we heard it over chat. 2 lines that would replace woo-woo in our shared patois as the byline for failure. Divisible by 0. Shit. I fucked up. And, just like our first foray into the hotel corridors, the chat filling with screams of frustration at Divisible, players started popping like meaty balloons. Corpse watching duty. The clan were pretty pissed at Divisible right then, but Honk heard him out. Divisible told us that the game had spawned a head crab in the hotel room, and they'd broken eye contact with the corpse in the attempt to take it out. They also said, in no uncertain terms, that they weren't going to spend a minute longer staring at a disembodied cartoon corpse so that some people on the internet could run around a maze of death traps. This was a fair call, and Divisible ended up leaving with our best wishes. Divisible got into World of Warcraft instead, and picked up some new pronouns somewhere along the path. Sorry about the other posts, by the way. I will go back and fix them when I can. We still speak from time to time. Our next plan was to have one of us watching the corpse, and one of us protecting them from Divisible's head crab, while the rest of the clan tackled the labyrinth. All of a sudden, though, it turned out that remarkably few members of the clan were willing to volunteer. In the end, I stepped forward, and Jersey99 stayed to take out the head crab when it showed up. Keeping your screen focused on a scene of gore, even cartoon gore, is harder than it looks. I didn't want to miss what the rest of the clan were up to, but there was something about that terrifying wide-eyed grin that kept drawing my eye from the blow-by-blow report in chat. Still, I knew at this point that it was this or disappoint a group of people who made up, at that point, almost my entire circle of friends. Jersey99 and I were ready for the head crab, but it never came. It was just a sound effect, designed to panic whoever was watching the corpse into breaking eye contact and killing their teammates. I found this reassuring at first. It meant that we didn't need to waste an extra body on keeping the room safe, and that I didn't need to rely on anybody else watching my back. Then I realized that it would mean I was alone in the room with this thing, listening to the battle report coming in like the helpless general in some bad sci-fi movie. And things did get bad. Outside of the hotel corridors, the map really stops pulling its punches. The pure puzzles stop, and the players have to jump from moving platform to moving platform, often while their teammates defend them from attack by multiple enemies. Whoever the designer was, they must have been years ahead of their time. You can encounter gameplay tricks in TRAINING.BSP that it would take Blizzard some time to develop and polish to a shine for the elaborate raid bosses of World of Warcraft. The real battle is in the hotel room though, and it is purely psychological. It turns out that the head crab screech is the first and crudest of a number of tricks that the hotel room will play in order to get you to break eye contact. I think the mapmaker tried it out as a test, and when he realized how well it worked, let loose every cruel trick that he could imagine. The first thing to happen after the screech is that the lights in the room will dim and go out, leaving you alone in the dark with a disembodied corpse. The first instinct in this situation is to turn on your flashlight, at which point you discover that it has moved, only slightly, and it's still in pieces. But by this point you've been staring at it for a good 10 minutes. You know that thing like the back of your hand, which is a disturbing realization in and of itself. But you know that it is just a character model, of course, so you continue to watch it. Just you, the corpse, and a flashlight, alone in a darkened room, as your friends are picked off one by one somewhere else. Sooner or later, though, your flashlight is going to run out of battery, a feature carried over from Half-Life, and one which the designer seems to have anticipated. Because just as your flashlight gives up for good, plunging you into darkness, you see it starting to get to its feet. Nodding with the dead. I fucked up. I knew it was just a game, and I still freaked out and tried to get as far away as I could from that thing with its blank grin and its severed arms dangling like the limbs of a puppet, and my clan got wiped again. They were pretty pissed, but funny thing, when I offered to let one of them take over, there wasn't a single taker. Not one. If I sound like a big drama queen about this, I guess, well, if you spend that amount of time staring at a corpse in a darkened room, then maybe you're entitled to a little drama. And I guess it's kind of hypocritical of me to go off on one about teenage gamer hysteria, and then vent about a spooky map for a long dead FPS in the next breath. But you know what? This was tough for me. So bite me. I was actually considering removing that paragraph, but I figure I ought to stand by my mistakes. Even the run-on train of thought ones. So anyway, back to TRAINING.BSP. It was around about this point that we decided to try breaking the map open in Hammer and skipping to the end. Aside from anything else, those of us who did dabble in map making were itching to figure out how the designer had managed some of its tricks. No luck though. Opening the thing up crashed the editor catastrophically. Wrinkles, our expert modder, reckoned that he'd filled the file with garbage geometry that made it impossible to open. It's possible that a modern computer would have the memory to handle it, but our shitty boxes back then didn't stand a chance. In any case, I was ready for the jump scare the second time around, and I didn't even flinch at the sample of heavy, strained breathing that you get now that the dead girl is standing there, inches from your character's face. It's at this point in the development cycle that the mapmaker must have had a brainstorm, because now it starts to talk to you. Not in the local chat, not in text, through a strained, high-pitched voice sample that instructs you to nod if you understand. A simple swish of the mouse, up and down. It's a cheap trick, because, of course, if you nod too much, then you'll break eye contact with it. And in the dark, it's difficult to tell exactly how far is too far. It also means that you find yourself nodding along at your computer desk, just like how you're probably nodding without realizing as you read this. So for a while, you listen, while it talks and gets you to nod along to whatever it's saying. Because while you don't know at this point that disobeying it will kill the rest of your team, and you're not sure the game can even tell whether your character is nodding yet, you sure as hell don't want to disappoint them a second time. It gets you to promise not to talk to them without its permission, and to agree about how exciting it feels to have the power to kill so many people with such little effort. Again, all cheap tricks, but it plays them well. And, for me at least, it was playing them for the first time. What screwed things up for that run was the game's next instruction to me, to type "time to die" and the name of one of the players. It's probably easiest to just post the transcript after this. Professor Player 1. Time to die, Jersey 99. Honk. PP, what are you doing? Jersey 99 died. Jersey 99 dead. What the fuck? Honk. Not funny, man. Corporal 1PC. Did he fucked up again? 90th. God damn it. Professor Player 1. Game told me to type it. Sorry. Part of its mind games. Corporal 1PC died. Honk died. Corporal 1PC dead. You stupid asshole! Jockstrap died. 90th died. Wrinkles died. The death count carried on from there. When the game tells you to stop talking in chat, it's not joking around. Honk in charge. Things got pretty ugly after that. Accusations started flying around that I had done it deliberately, somehow. That I'd created the map in order to fuck with them, that I was spying on the clan on behalf of King, and this was part of his revenge on us. A few of them even talked about doxing me, ostensibly, to confirm that I wasn't an alt of King's. The usual bullshit. But the fact that the clan had been banging their collective heads against this map for so long hadn't exactly been good for morale. There's something about the way it's built, something that goes beyond regular tension and jump scares and makes you feel kind of sick and dirty inside, degraded even, for even coming into contact with it. And I guess we were all starting to feel it. Even after cooler heads prevailed, nobody was happy for me to carry on with corpse watching duty. So, from there on in, with nobody else ready to step up, Honk eventually volunteered, with orders to the clan to ignore anything and everything that he typed. And I got to see just how bad the rest of training got. It got pretty bad. The rest of the clan must have gotten blasé about it, but I still found something pretty fucked up about navigating through a level that was half gauntlet of death traps and half museum to poorly drawn art. Once into the junkyard, our name for the area with the rusted metal walls, they stopped looking even remotely human, sporting the wrong number of eyes, impossible proportions, limbs with too many bends, like some sort of bizarre sexualized cubist painting. Whenever I tried to bring it up, the others just shrugged it off, told me to shut up and move on. In their defense, once the players hit the junkyard, they're on the clock. The corpse will keep on asking the player watching her for a name to pick off, and the wait in between will get shorter and shorter. The messages that she forced Honk to type got stranger and stranger, too. I was expecting it to try and fake us out with messages to abort, instructions to press Alt F4, or graphic threats of violence. And to be fair, we did get our share of those too, but there were plenty that just seemed fairly innocuous, or entirely non sequitur. Honk. I guess this is how leadership works, right? It's weird. She sounds almost sad now. I don't think she actually wants to kill any of you. She just needs me to understand. I'm getting close to the end now, and I ought to admit here and now that I don't have a way to close this. I can tell you everything that happened, and why we never got to see the end of training. But if you want to know what happens at the end of the map, then your only option is to somehow hunt it down yourself. For obvious reasons, I can't recommend it though. The Last Run. Delta Force made our last expedition into TRAINING.BSP on July 9th, 2005. Honk took corpse watching duty, and the rest of us made our way through the maze of traps. We'd figured it would be a run like any other. We'd gotten used to the creepy chat messages that Honk was forced to communicate, and we were starting to get a handle on the way puzzles in the junkyard worked. Things were going pretty smoothly when Honk spoke up in chat with a message we hadn't seen before. Honk. Guys, stop playing now. This isn't a message, this is serious. This run is over. Gotta go. Honk disconnected. That was all I managed to record before the game crashed catastrophically on me. The rest of the clan reported something similar. We didn't hear from Honk again. At the time, it was pretty easy to just vanish off the internet if he wanted. He deleted his account on our forums that night, as well as the email address that he used. If he had a real name, we didn't know it. Things pretty much fell apart after that. Some of us supposed that the job of corpse watching just got to him, like it got to Divisible. Others speculated that his family, his home life was one of the few things that he was open about with us, came in and freaked out. And a bunch of them jumped back to the conspiracy theory about King. A few of us posted our findings on Planet Half-Life, but by then, the community was dead or dying. I never really got to the bottom of TRAINING.BSP. My life got kind of complicated for a while after that, and I drifted away from FPS games. If it wasn't for the screenshots that I'd kept, I'd be convinced that it was some weird, improbable dream. That's really all I have to share with you. I'm sorry if it's not the ending you were hoping for. We don't always get them. But I hope that at least it's been an interesting ride through one of the truly weirder bits of early 2000s first-person shooters. Thursday, December 7th, 2017. Update. I feel kind of bad about bringing this blog back to life after so long, but it would be wrong to leave this out. I managed to track Honk down. From time to time, if I'm drunk, if it's late, and if I have nothing better to do, I'll search online to see if anyone has uncovered anything new about it, or, if I'm honest, to see if anybody remembers us. Usually, I don't find anything. Last night, there was something new. I don't browse Reddit as a matter of habit, but r/gaming had a thread about obscure video games where somebody had brought up the topic of TRAINING.BSP, and one of the voices insisting that it was a hoax seemed not only knowledgeable in the details of the game, but had a style that I couldn't help but recognize. Like I say, in the days before profile pictures were a thing, a person's typing style was everything. So I got in touch. I asked him if he used to go by the handle Honk on Planet Half-Life, and if he did, whether he felt like chatting again. It's probably easiest if I just post the transcript. Using the old screen name seemed weirdly appropriate. Kind of like two old men squeezing themselves into drainpipe jeans to try and go clubbing again. Honk. So, I was honestly wondering if I'd ever be able to have this conversation. And here I am. So I guess that answers that. Professor Player 1. I'm just glad you're okay. Honk. Yeah. It was a rough couple of years, but honestly I'm better off out of the leadership. Too much stress. Still, that's what leadership is. You have to put yourself forward. Do the dirty jobs that nobody else is willing to do, because it would tear them apart if they had to. Professor Player 1. Dirty jobs is right. I still get nightmares sometimes about staring that corpse down. Honk. Yeah, you and Divisible were the only ones who knew what it was like. How is he, by the way? Professor Player 1. They're the only one I stay in contact with, but much happier, less fucked up. Probably for the best that it ended when it did. Honk. You think so? Man, after we got that far in, you're not curious about how it ends? 'Cause I still have a copy, and I've been in touch with a few of the others. I reckon we could make a pretty good go at it, if we tried. What do you say? I could add you on Facebook. We could talk it over. Professor Player 1. You want to try again? After all that? Honk. Dude, it's just a game. They're not real. Nothing is. Professor Player 1. Maybe. I've kind of moved on from gaming now. Honk. Lol. We're all kind of rusty. Professor Player 1. The reason I got in touch was that I wanted to make sure you were safe. You sounded like you were freaking out when you quit. No contact details or anything. Honk. Oh, that. Yeah, the game got to making all sorts of threats to me. Pretending it knew where I was. Threatening to kill me, kill my family. Just some cold reading and lucky guesswork, looking back on it. But at that age, well, you have a tendency to take what people on the internet tell you for granted. Anyway, while we were playing, my mum took a fall down the stairs, broke her hip. We had to rush her to hospital. Nobody's fault. But I got the idea in my head it was me, or the game, or whatever, that it was real. freaked out for a bit. Just tried to get as far away from it as I could. Professor Player 1. Who the fuck are you? Honk's mom died when he was 5. Honk has left the conversation. I hope you've enjoyed this story as much as I have. Personally, I think this story is a hidden gem within the creepypasta community. It's one of my favorite of all time. I've read it a few times at least. The author of this story goes by Whybird online, and I'll include a link to his Neocities page in the description. It was based on Hondo's action Half-Life maps, in particular 5 AM. 5 AM is a map that also contains a sprawling Easter egg, as well as a dismembered anime girl hidden in the level in a suitcase. It's really freaky stuff and a great piece of inspiration for this story. Some of the reasons why I enjoy this creepypasta are as follows. The setup of this story gets you invested in the characters very early on, as you learn about their group's history and their drama, and it almost puts you in the shoes of the author before the events of the story unfold. Another reason why this creepypasta stands out is that the author gives a very detailed description of the map and the way the characters discover it in the first place. And as the players go along, it kind of drip feeds you information which builds the suspense and mystery, and it makes you want to push forward as much as the characters in the story do. I think the corpse watching section was my favorite part because it's at this point that the story takes a dark turn and you really start to wonder what kind of twisted mind could have made this map and for what purpose. And the ending of this story is one of the best, if not the best ending to a creepypasta, at least a gaming creepypasta that I've read. You might notice that the ending was foreshadowed very early on in the story with the line about typing styles. Finally, the aspect of this story which I feel is one of the most important for a gaming urban legend such as this is that the story is very believable. There's nothing really supernatural about it. The author is actually very clearly knowledgeable about the game that he's describing, and it makes you wonder if this story actually could have happened. The only criticism that I have of this creepypasta is that near the end, the author alludes to having screenshots of what transpired, but from what I can see, there are no screenshots to be found on the page this is posted on. I have read some comments related to this creepypasta from people saying that this story was originally posted on Something Awful, but I searched and I found nothing, which is quite a shame because screenshots from the author would have taken this already amazing creepypasta to the next level. But other than that, this is one of the greatest gaming-related creepypastas out there, and I hope you enjoy it. Good evening and good night.